everybody. This is Stephanie Ruper. Thank you so much for tuning into the Naked Humanity podcast, where we take the deepest dive possible into the question of what it means to be human. Today is episode number 42, and I have on Kyla Tova, who's a specialist in the relationships between body image, identity, branding, and marketing. So Kyla and I actually go way back. She and I met while I was working and she was beginning to work in the health and nutrition space online. So many of you know, although not all of you perhaps, that I have a side gig and once a very prominent gig as a advocate and promoter of women's health. And I would help women with their hormone problems, with endocrine issues, with fertility issues, and also spoke a lot about psychology and body image because it's all very, interrelated, the way that you think and feel about yourself and the way that you eat, right? And so Kyla and I met in this space, and she has been on a really fascinating journey from wrestling with food, with disordered eating, with eating disorders, and with participating in diet culture and with becoming obsessed with health, right? And achieving perfect health. And then sort of taking a step back and analyzing all of that and realizing like what diet culture is and what diet culture does and why women get so wrapped up in it. And of course, men as well, but especially women. And what are the alternatives? What can we do about it? And so Kyla actually has put together this brilliant podcast, which she'll tell us about in a minute, where she talks with people like myself who have worked in the space or do still work in this space and asks them really hard questions like, why do you feel comfortable selling weight loss programs? Which is a question she asked me, right? What expertise do you have? Why do you think people need this expertise? How do you do it? Do you intentionally make people feel bad in order to make them buy your products? Do you try to make them feel good in order to make them buy your products? Do you feel ethical at all talking about weight loss online? Like all of these kinds of questions. And I love how she has been a part of this space, continues in some way to be a part of this space, and is also transforming this space by asking these really hard, fascinating questions about the way our modern world is set up. Right. And we know that things sell, right, when they promise to fill a gap in our lives. And maybe that means that they make us feel bad about ourselves in the first place, right? This is why we're all so obsessed with losing weight, because we're terrified that nobody's going to love us unless we look a particular way, right? Like, and these discourses are so like hammered into us all of the time from all different angles, from our friends, from magazines, from social media, from movies, from constantly seeing people who are thin advertised in a positive way, all these sorts of things. So it's so important to get our heads into these spaces and to understand how these worlds are affecting us and how they shape the decisions we make, why we buy things. So anyway, Kyla and I have a fantastic, really fascinating conversation about this in the forthcoming episode. I'll read you a little bit about her to give you some background before we get started. Kyla Tova, after recovering from orthorexia, anorexia, and an exercise addiction, Kyla began a career in marketing while moonlighting as a body image coach for women recovering from eating disorders and disordered eating. She recently released a 15-episode podcast documentary about marketing literacy, neoliberal feminism, and identity economics in the context of health and fitness entrepreneurship called Your Body, Your Brand. This fall, she joined the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Communication Arts Department to pursue a PhD in rhetoric, politics, and culture. In Kyla's quote-unquote spare time, she is the award-winning burlesque dancer and drag artist Will X, also known as DD Queen. She is the reigning leading man of the Hollywood Burlesque Festival, won the 2018 San Francisco Drag King contest, and was named the 2018 Master of Tassels, Master of Amazement, and bronze medalist at the California Burly Picks. Wow, it's pretty cool. It's really fun to be your friend on Facebook. Just saying. Connect with Kyla at kylatovaprinz.com or on Twitter or Instagram at Body Brand Pod, all of which I will link to in the show notes. For Dragon Burlesque, if you're so interested, you can find her on Instagram at Performing Woman. And her Dragon Burlesque is truly amazing. So do check that out. Do check out her podcast, which is amazing, and which I am on. And do get at her or get at me at Stephanie Ruper on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter if you have any questions, ideas, or things you'd like to share. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. Here is Kyla Tova. Okay. Hi. Welcome, Kyla.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. I was just telling people that, I don't know, I'm super excited. And I was obviously telling you this. It's been, how many years has it been since we've chatted? Like 3, 4, 3?
I think it might have been 2 because I had you on my podcast and I've been working on it for about 2.5 years. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I have been watching this project unfold. I don't, like, I'm kind of a Facebook lurker. Like, I don't do a ton of interacting, but I see everything. So I've been... I've been very up to speed on what's been happening with your podcast. So maybe we can jump right into it and you can tell us like what it is and why it exists. Why did you, and you put years into this podcast and now you're like debuting it all at once, like this beautiful series, which I think is just great. So go on.
Yeah, sure. So I started working on this podcast in February of 2017 because I had been a health coach. This is actually how I met you. I was a fan of yours, and I was kind of in the paleo nutrition world back in 2012, 2013, something along those lines. And I got it into my head that I was going to be a health coach. So I started studying through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in 2013, started taking on clients. And I pivoted as I had started to move away from paleo towards body image. So I was working with women who had disordered eating, not eating disorders. I did have a few clients who had eating disorders, but only with the consent and the collaboration of their therapists. So I was helping them work on the post-recovery stuff while they were doing the recovery work with their therapists. But I really had it in my head that I was going to be this like amazing big health coach with a huge following and a big website, and the SEO was going to come naturally, and the Twitter following was going to somehow make me affiliate marketing deals. I don't know. It was a whole thing. So I poured about $20,000 of my own money into building a health coaching business over about 4 years. And I lost those $20,000. I had worked with business coaches. I went on retreats. I got certified through IIN and then also got a secondary certification through the Holistic MBA, which is now a different company. Obsessed with being a health coach. And no matter what I did, it never grew. It never changed. I spent every weekend hustling. I was working a full-time job in addition to this. And it just didn't happen for me. And I got disillusioned, really disillusioned. And I started hanging out with people who were interested in doing feminist marketing, trying to understand what it is about the vision of successful health coaches that made me think I could do it too. Following people like Marie Forleo, who basically said, it's just easy. You just get a following and then it all just kind of shakes out. You just hustle a little and then you're a lady boss. And I was so disillusioned with everything. And I just was like, why are we so persuaded when we see these images of successful women to want to follow in their footsteps? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do like a short 8-episode podcast about this. And I'm just going to talk to some of my friends in the feminist marketing world. And it'll just be a quick little primer on marketing rhetoric, right? Because I had at the same time started reading books on persuasion, marketing rhetoric, not to learn how to use it, but to understand why it worked, if that makes sense. So less Gary Vaynerchuk and more like actual academics. Yeah. So, so as I started doing these interviews, I realized that everyone was telling the same story. And I thought, well, I can't just release the same podcast over and over. Maybe I should just put them in conversation. And then one of the women with whom I spoke, she said to me, women are dropping out. Women are dropping out of the workforce because they are so tired of having to ape men in order to attain any kind of success. And when she said those words, it really stuck with me, because even though that was kind of what the podcast was about, it wasn't about that until that moment. And from there, it just kind of spiraled. And now I have over 40 hours of tape that I have edited together into 15 episodes.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a huge undertaking. Every episode probably took between 10 to 20 hours to create. I did the whole thing by myself. So I went to writing meetups in the morning, in the evening, and the weekends to just sit and edit tape, to write scripts, to figure out, how your interview would tie into something that Dan Pink said, which is actually a thing. And I think it's episode 3 or episode 5. I can't remember. But you know what I mean? So it's like taking bits and pieces from what everyone said, and not manipulating anything, because the whole point is to explain how, manipulation does, we don't want to do that. But anyway, the idea is just to tell the story of why people who identify as female feel that entrepreneurship is the best. And this is not every single female identifying person, but rather this particular cohort of female identifying people, why they feel like health coaching, yoga teaching, personal training, some kind of health and wellness career is the answer to disillusionment in other potential areas of economic success, I guess. So anyway, long story short.
That's cool. And that's actually different from what I remember, right? Because this was years ago.
Yeah.
So do you have the episodes organized like thematically?
Yes, exactly.
Wow. So you splice all these interviews together to sort of talk every week about what are some like example topics from different weeks?
Well, so I can tell you a little bit about the arc of it. So we talk in episode 1 about diet culture and how it perpetuates itself through the internet. I think it's a good doorway in, because I think that's what everyone is expecting it to be about. Right. And also for people who may stumble on the podcast but don't know anything about diet culture or fat phobia, health at every size, it's a good primer. So there's an episode on diet culture, but then the next episode is about women explaining why they dropped out of the workforce. So it's about different factors that might contribute to that. The third episode is about what is a brand, right? And then from there, it kind of builds. So there's an episode on identity economics. There's an episode on eating disorders, and how many people with eating disorders actually hide their eating disorders by becoming health coaches. That one's the kicker episode, I feel like. There are several episodes that kind of do an introduction to neoliberal feminism, and to economics, like feminist economics. And there's an episode on collectivism. So, it kind of spans the whole, there's a spectrum, but at the same time, it tells a singular story. There's also a 2-part episode on multi-level marketing as a case study, but it's not the kind of episode that you think it's going to be, because I actually did my best to not frame it as MLM is bad and here's why. That wasn't what I was interested in. There's plenty of podcasts on that. You can listen to that, do your thing. I am interested in, why do women see it as a viable source of income?
Right.
That's it. That's all I want to know. So I made an effort to speak to women who are doing well with it or who love doing MLM, because I just wanted to know why. It was a curiosity thing as opposed to I have an opinion thing. And I thought that was important because nobody's doing that with multi-level marketing. It's either like 100% pro or 100% con,
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's so important. I had a conversation with a woman here once. This is a bit of a tangent, and she studies women in entrepreneurship. And I used the word mompreneur like a little bit pejoratively. And she was like, look here, Steph, like any way in which women are like sort of trying to own, right? Like you don't look at multi-level marketing or anybody sort of behaving in this space as being a slave to some machine or just doing something really small. In a lot of ways, this is people taking ownership of their skills and their lives and their networks. And I thought that was really important. Isn't there some statistic, like some massive proportion of high figure female earners are actually an MLM? Isn't it like, I don't know, 80 or 90% of women who make six figures? Something huge.
Is that, oh, I hadn't heard that. That's incredible. But I mean, but that's the thing is it's like, when you're presented with that information, why would you bother trying to go learn how to code and fight with men in an open plan office for 10 years only to be denied a raise or a promotion when you've got an easy, obviously you still have to work, way in. So
Right.
That's kind of what the podcast is asking is it's like, what are these barriers and why does the body and health, like why do these like ways in which we can tap into our networks of other women or female identifying people, however you want to look at this group, right?
Right.
Why is that so much more, why does it seem so much more effective? And a lot of it is the way that it's presented online. And for a lot of women, there's a lot of failure, but you don't see it because you don't put the failures online. Or when you do, then bad things happen. People actually don't want to see it, so they block you, they stop following you, they stop caring, etc.
Right.
So, so it's this podcast actually is going to form the basis of what I'm going to be studying for my PhD. And it's how I presented that to the committee, the admissions committee. But I'm interested in looking at this further and deeper. And the podcast is kind of my way of opening the door, not just for myself, because a lot of it was discovery. Over the last 2.5 years, I have learned so much. But it's also a way of opening that door for other people, because before I was even considering a PhD, I wasn't reading books on neoliberalism, right? I didn't know anything about identity economics because a lot of these things are walled off from the layperson, right? So what you see is Gary Vaynerchuk and a lot of successful people instead, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is so much a part of, that is why I'm doing this podcast, is because I hate that paywall. I hate that, the wall exists for so many reasons. And I think it's so cool. I feel so excited that all of these different sort of experiences and ways that you've explored your identity and your role in the world, like I love the way that they're coming together. And I think, I don't know, I'm like really excited to read your dissertation someday.
Me too. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I start school after Labor Day. So everything from there is just the work, I guess.
Cool. Okay. So let's start at the beginning-ish, or maybe the foundation, which is, here are people online, such as I kind of am and definitely once was, who like they're selling you something, right? And they're trying to sell you health, or they're trying to sell you beauty, but in doing so, like, you have to make a pitch, right? And so can you like tell us a little bit about what that sort of process looks like, or what might be some ethical questions that you have to look at when you're doing that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Well, so when we're talking about like this world that I'm basically calling neoliberal wellness, right? We have to understand first and foremost, like, what are the roots of it, right? Like, so you and I were around the same age. And so we grew up in a world where neoliberalism was the foundation of everything that we do, right?
Can you explain neoliberalism? Are you about to? Okay.
Yes. So now, and I'm not a scholar of neoliberalism. That's why I'm going back to school, is to learn more about it, right? But from the conversations that I've had, from the research that I've done, I will explain it to you in the best way possible. But please feel free, at me if you want a better explanation. But essentially, neoliberalism is kind of it's a version of capitalism where everything is privatized, everything, belongs to the market. There is no division of church and state, if you will, when it comes to like the private realm and the market realm. So it's not just like, oh, healthcare is on the market. It's like literally you as a person, as a unit of human capital, you are part of the market. It's a worldview in which we actually look at ourselves as numbers on a spreadsheet, and we look at our value as humans based on our ability to earn or our future ability to earn. And that future ability to earn, it's very early in the morning here, is the most important thing, I think, in the context of neoliberal wellness, because the way in which we position ourselves, the way I certainly position myself as a health coach, as a blogger, as a podcaster, was I'm here, but I'm going to be here, and this product or this service or this this program, whatever, this book, this meditation, whatever, is going to help me get to here so that I can then be a more valuable individual in terms of the larger society, right? And so in terms of the market. Neoliberalism is an incredibly individualistic ethos. It looks at every single person. It asks us to, it's not just put your oxygen mask on first. It's just you are the only unit that matters to yourself, and then deal with everybody else later. Because if you're busy, out there helping everybody else share the wealth, et cetera, and you're not focused on your own personal rise to the top first, then you don't rise. That's kind of the ethos, right? And you'd think that it would be like, oh, this is only like one political party or one, political side. It's not. It has completely invaded everybody's way of viewing the world. So even for my friends who are like social justice warrior type, like super lefty, even they still view their work through the lens of neoliberalism, because that's how you exist in this world. That's the whole, like, put your PayPal link in the bottom. It's not about you helping others. It's about you getting paid for your work, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You should get paid for your work, but it's the ethos that drives that. But anyway, I hope that made sense. I'm still halfway through my cup of coffee.
Yeah, no. So that's actually, I think, a really helpful framing. And then, so what ends up happening, I think, a lot is that you sit with the question of like, okay, so how am I going to make people feel, right? How am I going to present my, like, quote unquote skills or ideas or whatever? How am I going to present what I have to them in a way that makes me get paid for my work, right? And so for me, obviously, and I think hopefully for a lot of people, there's this very deep and hard question of how do I serve people honorably while at the same time, like, quote unquote, get paid for my work. And especially when you're talking to people about issues such as like the way that they look, right? Like, it becomes a huge question of how you're participating in the discourse and whether you're like, but very basically, I mean, we know that like advertising works the worse it makes you feel about yourself.
Yeah. And, and it's interesting because there's an opposite side to that, where a lot of the girl power, lady boss, fempreneur, mompreneur ethos is not about feeling bad about yourself, but about feeling so good about yourself that nothing can hurt you. And in a lot of ways, that is actually just as damaging. And the reason is because neoliberalism doesn't share the wealth equally. If you are to invest in this idea that you can someday feel that girl power, lady boss ethos, if you go ahead and go, you know what, I'm going to buy all these things. I'm going to invest in the thing. I'm going to do the program. I'm going to do the fitness, whatever, all of those things. You invest in that. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to have the results that you see online, right? And for a lot of women, they don't realize that. And it's not like, oh, they're not smart enough to see that. It's just that advertising, it taps into this like primal area in your brain. It's kind of like playing the lottery, where you're like, well, I know that there's a good chance I'm not going to win, but I can see the chance that I could win. Mm-hmm. And so you play anyway. And it's only $1. They ask for a small investment. You give that $1. Then maybe you buy a $5 ticket. Then maybe you buy a $20 ticket. And now you're playing because you've already made these investments. And now you're somebody who plays the lottery, you know? So in a lot of ways, I feel like the advertising that comes out of the neoliberal wellness space isn't about making you feel bad, even if often it does. Mm-hmm. An example of that would be, let's say that there's somebody who is selling a fitness program and they're saying it's body positive, but the end goal is that you're going to get thin, right? So there's a lot of the body positive people out there who view body positivity as my body, my choice, and my choice is to be thin. Right. And therefore I'm positive about it. I am positive I want to be thin. That's their body positivity. And so they frame all of their stuff as like, you're doing this for you. Mm. You're doing this for you. You're doing it because you care about your health. You do it because you care about yourself. You do it because you care about your kids and you want to live longer, whatever the framing is. But at the end of the day, for a lot of people, of any gender, really, trying to lose weight intentionally isn't possible without extreme exercise, without extreme restriction, without the purchase of dangerous or excessive or unnecessary supplements. And so for them, they end up feeling terrible about themselves, even though it's been framed as like, but I'm doing it for me. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've run into a lot of interesting discourse. It's in the academy, but like there are pockets of it elsewhere, in our conversations where there's this like imperative, right, to be happy. It's sort of,
yes.
It borders the whole critique of social media that's very popular right now, where it's like, oh, here are all these like beautiful images of these perfected lives and everybody's presenting them to us. And it sort of participates in that, which is basically saying like, we're presenting you with this, it's a promise, and that's actually very interesting to me as a scholar of religion, because I think the powerful thing about religion is promise. And
yes,
I think the powerful thing about pretty much anything, right? About Donald Trump, about Obama, like about anybody, it's the promise. And we're suckers for promises because we want things that are going to save us.
Mm-hmm. Actually, Catherine Rottenberg, who wrote the book Neoliberal Feminism, highly recommend everyone go out and read it. It's academic. So, be prepared for that. It's not a quick read, but it's important. And she actually talks a lot about happiness. I actually had her on the podcast to talk about it because happiness is an imperative. It is that promise. It is this idea that, we can have it all. The feminist ideal of like, somehow we're going to be happy being productive units of human capital while also trying to raise a family, while also trying to, go out and start a second business, while also, and what we see online, what our brands do is we have to position it as ultimately, you will be happy, you will be fulfilled, you will be, I don't know, at the peak of whatever it is that you believe that you're going to attain. And in reality, when you turn off social media, there's so much more going on outside the frame. So much more. Yeah.
So then what, how can we communicate to one another? Right. Like, so what do we do if we pull promises out of the discourse? Like, then what does it look like?
Well, that's the question. I mean, in terms of
sorry.
No, it's an important question. Thank you for asking it. And because this is the thing that I'm particularly grappling with, how do we effectively market and advertise to one another? Or is the question, do we need to be doing that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess that's the thing is while we live in a world where, money is distributed unequally, right? And we have to figure out how to earn as much as possible because living in a city or even just living anywhere right now is basically unaffordable, right? You have to make money. You have to have some kind of enterprise. No job is guaranteed anymore. And so we see these avenues to advertise to one another, to hustle, to build a side gig or to build a gig, period. We see it as necessary. So we have to market to one another. We have to advertise to one another. And our bodies are, especially as female identifying people, our bodies are our value in a lot of cases, because competing in the other areas where we have value, we actually have less value, whether or not we're better or, at the same level as other people.
Right.
So we turn to our bodies because we can control them, because we can manipulate them, because we can show them, because they are their products. And the question is, how do we do this in an ethical and non-manipulative way? And I don't think you can, is the problem, because social media is a visual medium. It is a medium wherein you are not presenting your whole, real, authentic self. You are presenting your authentic self, because anytime you set a camera up, you are deliberately choosing a frame. If you look at like feminist film theory, that's all it's about, is about the gaze. Who controls the gaze? How is the director setting up the shot, right? What does the cinematographer see for this scene? How does the subject view the object? And when you are self-objectifying, which is what this really is, how does that actually change what it is the intent of what you are doing? Right. I always find it so funny that, we see lady boss, momtrepreneurism, whatever, as this like feminist act when we are actually self-objectifying, right? Creating ourselves as consumable objects, as Kelly Deal says, right? And when we become the consumable object, even though we are the subject, like how does that change the way in which we, like what we see we're doing versus like what we're actually doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I'm curious then, like where I don't want to, where do we draw the line, or where does it stop? Because I mean, obviously then like we get up in the morning and we have to, like, you have to put on clothing, right?
Yes, of course.
And like, and we make choices, and sometimes I wear stilettos, and I actually most days, and sometimes I hate that about myself, and sometimes I like it, and like, there's such a huge series of choices that we make about how we present ourselves. And so we're always sort of, changing or directing people's gazes. And so like, how is this sort of different at all from what we do on social media? Or like, is it on a spectrum? And like, what can we do about it other than try to be honest?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, well, all human behavior is pretty much problematic. So, we can start with that as a baseline. Right?
That is the baseline assumption of this podcast.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I'm glad I'm on the same page then. Okay. So if we can assume that, like, look, none of us are perfect. And because we have grown up with certain socialization, with certain cultural norms, right? Whether or not those are acceptable in terms of like, the mystical, like, acceptable versus like culturally acceptable, right? So we can kind of like view this, as you said, as a spectrum. Okay, if you want to wear stilettos, wear stilettos. I'm not going to sit here and like beat a feminist drum and be like, you can't do that because whatever. That's at least not what I'm here to do, right? I think what it is to start from a place of awareness,
Sure.
And I think for a lot of women, they feel like they have that awareness, but they don't see what's behind the frame. And that's why I actually want to go back to school, because as a layperson, I did not know anything about how, identity economics works, right? I wasn't sitting there reading books by professors from like Berkeley or whatever. I was just going, I see my brand as a way to make money. And I know that to build a good brand, you have to look better, you have to sound better, and you have to spend more money to do both of those things. And the more I invested, the more I saw it as my purpose to do those things, right? To try to be this perfect brand. So understanding and breaking down why I did those things, right? Understanding the economics behind my actions helped me say, that is not what I want to be doing. Now, if it is something you still want to be doing, I can't stop you, right? We have these tools, and I'm not going to go out and change the culture tomorrow. I don't think any of us are. I think we're at a place in the human civilization where going backwards is going to take a lot of work and or a giant disaster, and knock on wood, the second doesn't happen, right? So if we're in this place, all we can do is operate with awareness. So instead of trying to build these billion-dollar brands, maybe the question is, what am I doing with this work? Why am I doing this work? Am I actually helping people feel better, or am I helping people feel better so that I can make more money? Right?
Right.
So if that makes sense, because I know it's a gray area, right? I don't want to tell anyone to stop trying to make money. I don't want to tell anyone to no, you should be back in the workforce because that's all that you are good for, even if, that's not your passion, that's not your whatever. But when we look at the rhetoric around building a passion-based business, building a fitness-based business, building a body-based business, if you look at the rhetoric, it's not always just about the work. It's about making you a better person, making you feel good, making you happy. And are those things coming at a price either to you or to the people to whom you're selling? That's all we can do is ask that.
Yeah. I mean, these questions are really, really big for me, especially currently. In my work in the health space in years previous, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the way I looked or presented myself. I was just kind of I'm here, listen to me if you want to. But now that I'm stepping into a space where I feel like I have ideas to contribute in a way that may be impactful, I really want to be heard. And so before we hopped on the air, Kyla saw me take out my braces, and I spent $5,000 this year straightening my teeth,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I have thought about getting my nose fixed, these, and I used to wear contacts when I recorded these, and oh, okay, well, my image is better when I wear my glasses, yeah. And how many sports coats do I own? Because I feel like if I, when I wear my blazers, people take me more seriously. And how do I get people to take me seriously as an academic woman? Oh my God, it's hard,
Oh, yeah.
And I see it as a price that I'm willing to pay to try to get into the discourse and then change it. But that's so much of and to put it in economic terms, it's a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah. And the question is, once you have made those investments, are you willing to then say, but this identity, once you're in the discourse, right? Can you then change it and say, well, this identity is fake, pull off the mask, and then go, right? Once you've made those investments, can you do that? And the answer is probably not. And I see this a lot. So I'm also a burlesque performer, right? And I see this a lot in the burlesque scene where there are burlesque dancers who are body positive and fat positive, and, they don't care what's your gender or your hair color or whatever. But then they are also but I also want to look like the person who's going to win. So I need to get my boobs fixed and I need to lose weight. And I look at these performers and I'm like, but you're a feminist and you're, but then they're but I also need to look like I can be objectified so that I can get in and win and be at the top.
Yep.
So yeah, it's complicated because the thing is, how do you earn your place? And it's often based on how you look. It's how you present. It's based on your brand, unfortunately. And brand itself is, God, it's the most problematic thing because it's reductive. It reduces you as a person, as this multifaceted, wonderful human who is quirky and just genuinely you, to how you present yourself and how you can be valued economically, politically, and socially in this world or in your sphere, in your niche. And I don't know how we change it yet, but that's why I'm going back to school to figure this out. Because of course I'm going to solve it in 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, you might. So question, I actually don't know what identity economics is. Now, is this related to the stuff you're talking about in terms of creating brands?
Yes. So identity economics actually is a concept by George Akerlof from Berkeley and Rachel Cranton from Duke. They're economists. And so, again, this is not I just read their article. They published in August 2000, and then I went and got their book, where they expanded upon it. But it's kind of like this niche section of behavioral economics, where it does not. Because in economics, right, we look at humans, Homo economicus, as this rational figure who makes rational decisions based on the principles of economics, which we're all taught from birth. Right. Whereas behavioral economics is kind of, it looks at human behavior as irrational and uses psychology to kind of analyze it. Mm-hmm. So identity economics kind of looks at the ways in which the investments we make in our identity then go on to reflect how we identify. Why some behavior, why we engage in problematic behavior as a result of those investments. So mm-hmm. I actually do a whole podcast episode on how it's called Dangerous Investments. I believe it's episode 4. But it's about how investing in our brands actually leads us to make more investments in those brands and then to become irrationally attached to those investments even after they've been revealed as bad. Right. Or dangerous or, or if they've led us to some kind of loss. Right. So that's kind like, there's a whole book, so we could be here for a couple of hours. But the idea is that human beings are not rational. And sometimes we don't think about it when we spend that dollar on the lottery. Right. That then makes us a lottery player. Right? We don't realize sometimes when we're in situations where we're being primed to behave certain ways based on our identity as well. So that I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's very important. And I'm so glad I know this exists because I don't know, I try very hard on this podcast. The conversations are very interdisciplinary, and identity is so foundational in so many academic disciplines, right? People look at identity in religion, people look at identity in psychology, of course. But it really is apparently, if I'm seeing it everywhere, like one of the foundational things that motivates our behavior, right? And that makes us do things like take gambles on advertising.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really interesting, having conversations about identity because like right now, obviously, that seems to be one of the driving conversations online, right? And there are so many wonderful things about identity that I don't want people to think like having an identity is bad, right? Like that's not No, because your identity helps you find other people like you, right? Humans are tribal creatures. That was, long before we existed in a world where you and I could talk on on Zoom over, hundreds of miles and, whatever. Human beings like to feel like we're part of a group, right? That's what we do. There's always been, and this obviously this touches on religion, right? There's always been insiders and outsiders. It helps us understand ourselves. So I don't think that identity is inherently bad and having one is bad. It's just that if you don't have the awareness of how your identity affects your actions or how somebody else can manipulate your identity or the way that you identify in order to extract money or some other kind of value from you, that's where the problem is. I work in marketing right now for a few more weeks before I go back to school. And so much of marketing is about identity. It's about market research of finding your niche, right? Understanding that niche, figuring out what those characteristics that drive purchases or other actions, and then manipulating them. Not necessarily in a bad way. I say manipulating in the sense of like that's the job of marketing, right? So viewed, regardless of your ethical lens, that is your job as a marketer, is to be manipulative, to understand the psychology of the exact person you are trying to target and use that understanding so that they don't even realize it. Ethically, I get real squeamish about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that marketing is bad, especially if you're doing it in a way to help drive people towards I mean, it's still, there's a lot of gray areas. I have a huge problem with behavioral economics and the whole like nudge world. I get really squeamish about it, but that's just me. I'm not speaking for everyone.
Right.
But that's the point of marketing. And that's actually like what literally I'm going back to study rhetoric because I'm interested in marketing rhetoric. I'm interested in the ways in which words, pictures, sound, all of those things are used to specifically manipulate just like this. I mean, look at Facebook ads, right? Like these tiny little niches to the point where we can like, Facebook knows who you are, what you want, where you've been, and they can use every single detail about you to tell a story to get you to click on something. It's just like, it's mind-blowing how easy it is to manipulate identity without even without realizing that you're being manipulated. So,
do you think that social media and the marketing that specifically happens on social media makes it easier for us to be like, is it a more effective tool? Is it easier for us to be sort of swept up in cohering our identity to these various narratives as opposed to, say, life before social media?
I think so. I mean, I can only speak as somebody who grew up on that weird divide, you know?
Yes.
I got AOL when I was 8, so I can't I don't know what life was like for my parents in the experiential way, right? I have been on the internet for as long as I have been able to remember. My entire life was about finding and creating identity online. I have a live journal from high school, and that was how I got into MySpace, which is how I got into Facebook. And I've lost friends and family members as a result of the ways in which that I have built my identity online and have been so dependent on it, you know? So I can only speak as somebody who has had that experience. But looking at the ways that social media has kind of sped up since I've been aware of it in the last, 5 to 10 years, it is really interesting to see how social media actually has become this really intense catalyst for it kind of puts identity into hyperdrive. And what's really weird about it is, because I'm thinking about it all the time, but I wasn't thinking about it before, the ways in which Facebook itself has changed its algorithms and changed what it surfaces as important has changed how I interact with people. So even a couple years ago when they announced that they were going to make news a big deal on their news feed, suddenly, I was sharing articles about body positivity and health at every size. And it was so important to do all of that, right? It was so important to talk about health, and I was connecting with health people. And as soon as Facebook was we're not doing that anymore, all of a sudden I'm getting a lot more interaction with people who are sharing pictures and memes and talk about their life as burlesque dancers. And it's I'm still connected with all the same people, but based on how this algorithm wants to present the world to me has changed kind of what I share and how I present myself as well. And so even as someone who's aware of it, I still get caught up in it,
Right. And we are so, on social media, in some ways, we're very, very passive, right? Because you scroll and you react to things that you see, and then you post things, you comment or you post or whatever in reaction to what you see. And even when you think of ideas of what to share, like you're saying, having these ideas about body positivity, you're still in a way reacting to what you're seeing. And there, in some ways, everything we do in life is reactive. But I think in social media, that's sort of, I think the word you used was on hyperdrive. So there's an advocate I know who talks about news feeds like slot machines, and right. And that's actually where the technology, where the idea came from in the first place, right? I mean, you just sort of scroll and react.
Yep. Yeah. There's a podcast that just came out. It's called Your Undivided Attention. Highly recommend listening to it because it's through the Center for Humane Technology. The guys who created this technology are doing a podcast to reveal what they created. So
that's really cool. Actually, Tristan Harris was the person who I was thinking about.
Yeah. So he talks about that on this podcast. So yeah, this is his podcast. So.
Oh, good. I'm glad they have a podcast. Yeah, I'll link to that. Because it's one of the more, again, you're talking about awareness, like it's kind of one of the more important things of which we need to be aware these days, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where like with the podcast that I'm doing, with the research I'm hoping to do, the thing is we need an interdisciplinary awareness, right? I think what happens is as humans, and especially as humans who are attracted to this idea of reductive brands, right? We want to know that there's like one truth, one thing we can follow, and that'll just be like, that's the answer, right? I mean, religion, obviously, right? We see this as, okay, the Bible, the Torah, whatever, the Quran, that's just that's your book, and everything kind of floats around that, right? So the same thing happens in the body positivity world, right? Okay, health at every size is the place in which we start, and everything else comes from that. And I say, no, we got to break that down, and we got to have an interdisciplinary study. We have to be able to understand technology, understand marketing, understand economics, understand feminism, right? And then take all of those things and then reapply them as a lens to whatever we want to study. And so that's why I'm so interested in like listening to podcasts about how the technology manipulates us at the same time as I'm listening to podcasts about economics. At the same time as I'm, reading books on, feminism, whatever, and not relying on one discipline to guide what it is we're trying to study. I don't know if that, sorry, again, my brain is.
I will reassure you again. Yeah, no, it's I think that's very important. And also just like we never want to be motivated by the same kind of idea, right? I never want to be motivated by the same kind of method, and I'm working really hard to try to encourage people to stop selecting their friends or stop selecting their news sources or whatever on the basis of, say, a specific ideological lens, right? As opposed to on the basis of like, are we willing to like challenge things and look at them in different ways? Because we really do need to look at things in different ways, which is what we're doing here. And I realize we're coming up on time. So I know time flies.
It really does.
Yes. And so, is there anything left that you would like to say, A, and B? Of course, I'll link to everything in the show notes, but will you tell us how to find all your stuff?
Yes, absolutely. I will say that just very quickly, being open to looking at things through different ideological lenses is so important. Like it literally, I can say that it changed my life. I would not be sitting here in this chair right now. I would probably still be in like eating disorder recovery and sitting by myself scrolling the internet. Being open to reading other people's opinions and being challenged, and you don't have to believe them, but just letting yourself be challenged and opening yourself up to the possibility that you're not right, opening yourself up to the possibility that you don't have all the answers, and opening yourself up to the possibility that, there is more to you than what you can show, there's more to you than what gets likes. There's more to you than what other people think is valuable in your little niche. And being okay with that, being okay with the gray and the messy and the stuff that doesn't get likes and the stuff that you can't present on social media, that is what I'm hoping, if nothing else, that people get out of this. I know we're not going to change economics. I know that women are still going to get paid 70 cents on the dollar. I know that those things are not going to change just because we're aware. But I think that if we don't start with that awareness, then in future generations, if there's still a world post-climate change, right? If there's still a world in the future, I just want it to have a little bit more hope than I think our generation does. But the thing is, if our generation doesn't start it, it's never going to happen. So that's my like sad little rant for the morning. But yeah, so people can find me if you want to @ me. I'm on Twitter at BodyBrandPod. I'm also on Instagram at BodyBrandPod, but I'm active on Twitter. And my website is bodybrandpod.com. The podcast launches September 2nd, and it's a 15-week series. So it's going to run through December 2nd, I believe. And I'm really hoping to make a season 2 using my research at school. So, and I mean, season 2 and beyond. So I do have a Patreon and everything if people want to help out, because this is not... I feel like an anti-capitalist podcast isn't going to get ads. So if anyone wants to help make season 2, please donate a couple bucks.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. Kyla just told y'all where to find her, where to find me. I won't bother saying it yet again. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do shoot either of us questions if you have questions. So yeah, thanks. And thank you, Kyla.
Thank you.